Welcome back in to the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast presented by DraftKings Pick 6. I am your host for the day, Brandon Kravitz, joined by RotoWire analyst and suffering Jags fan looking for an escape in the world of basketball today. He is Nick Whalen. How you living, Nick?
The living is good, life of a Jags fan. Tell you what, we got the 2-week stay in London. Really fired up for that showdown with the Patriots this weekend. But really, I was hoping to avoid any Jacksonville Jaguars talk on this pod. So
I just asked how you were doing. You didn't have to talk about the Jags. That was
yeah. I don't know. It's always on the mind.
We for the second week in a row, this has become a trend on this podcast for us when we sit down to record on Tuesday. The Jets break news. This time they did it a couple minutes before we hit record, and that, of course, is Davante Adams being traded to the Jets. Well, see, I was going to say the Nets. That's when you know it's official that basketball is on the mind, and that's why you came here today. So let's get into it. Coming up on today's episode, I'm going to ask Nick who the best player in fantasy is for some select teams, but I'm going to make it to where you can't choose the obvious. So we'll get some good secondary options there. Also, another round of the bounce and our most drafted players to this point on October 15th. More preseason last night. We're not going to spend too much time on it. The preseason in the NBA is largely just watching teams go through the motions with stuff that we already know. It was good to see Zach Edey out there, scored 23 points, grabbed 9 off the bench. Jarris Walker, the second-year player out of Houston, played 38 minutes. He got an extended look out there. We saw Bub Carrington get run in that starting lineup for the Washington Wizards. Ben Simmons played basketball. Giannis already posting double-doubles. Any key takeaways from last night in the preseason? A pretty heavy slate before we move on to our topic of the day.
You mentioned the Wizards who lost by 39 to the Nets last night. I mean, it's the preseason, but the Wizards are getting massacred on a nightly basis. Like, they're losing by like 30 points per game in their 4 preseason games. And, it doesn't really matter, but my goodness, I mean, starters are playing real minutes here. I mean, they had most of their starting 5 playing 23 to 26 minutes last night, and they're getting run out of the gym. And I know the Nets did build that lead in the fourth quarter as well. And Kyle Kuzma tacked on another air ball. He's had like 5 air balls in their last 2 games. We're on air ball watch when it comes to Kuzma. There's a highlight going around where he, essentially dropped Ben Simmons with a crossover, kind of took his time to collect himself. Wide open 3, was like 4 feet short. He was 0 of 6 from beyond the arc in this game. Just kind of a weird preseason for him. Good to see Bub Carrington, though, running with the first unit. That's been somebody who, I've taken with the final pick in some deeper drafts. I think there's a real path to him not only playing real minutes, but maybe starting for this team at some point. Malcolm Brogdon already hurt. Even once he's back, I don't think he plays out the entire season in Washington. He could be a shutdown candidate if he does. And there's just so little depth on this team. So little depth. Johnny Davis, their top 10 pick from a couple of years ago, I mean, he's struggling to even like see real minutes in the preseason. Like, he's somebody that I think is going down like the James Bouknight path where, he's not getting a second contract. I think they probably end up declining that next option year. So Bub Carrington is somebody I'm keeping an eye on. But I will say, Brandon, I've been impressed with the level of competition so far in the preseason. It does feel like most teams are playing out at least the first half, with most of their starters. We saw a super competitive game over the weekend between Minnesota and New York. I mean, that felt like a borderline playoff game.
I know. We're seeing real trash talk. Dante DiVincenzo getting into it. And he said after the game, hey, that's just my competitive spirit. And I'm thinking, but why do you have that competitive spirit during your preseason game? To that point, these guys seem like they're locked in. They're ready to go. It is nice to see. I wish it meant something, and I'm ready for the games to actually count. We did not see Alex Sarr last night when you mentioned the Wizards, so that's probably the guy that we're most curious about as far as Washington goes, but like Nick said, sort of a train wreck there. A lot of folks have drafts coming up, so I think a good way to conceptualize who you like is this idea that I thought of where I'm going to come up with, I'm going to name a team. And Nick, you are going to tell me who the most fantasy relevant name is on that team outside of the obvious. So I'm going to eliminate the most obvious option. And we want to start with the Golden State Warriors. So you can't choose Steph. who should we be targeting after Steph on the Golden State Warriors?
Well, ADP and my mind would tell me that the player I'm most interested in is Jonathan Kuminga this season. And I think the Warriors are a great team to start with because there is a very obvious guy at the top in Steph Curry. And even he is discounted relative to past years. Beyond that, a ton of question marks on this team. I think it's fair to wonder what the ultimate upside is for the Warriors, what the direction will be, especially if they were to get off to a slow start or if Steph Curry were to miss time. And he's missed a lot of time over the last few years. Was mostly healthy last season, but the track record since he's kind of been in his 30s is not fantastic. Obviously a guy that had injury issues early in his career as well. I think, unless you're a Andrew Wiggins sympathizer and you think we got a big bounce back Andrew Wiggins season coming, I mean, Jonathan Kuminga to me is the second option in this offense. Draymond's still going to be kind of playing his unique Draymond role. I do think Brandon Pajemski takes a big step forward this season. He's another guy I like and still somebody you can get well after pick 100 in a lot of drafts. I mean, his ESPN ADP is like 131. Kuminga, I think, is really affordable as well. There's a huge contrast right now between where he goes in best ball drafts versus where he goes in season long. And we finally saw Kuminga, take a pretty sizable step forward last season. I still think there's room for him to progress as far as minutes played. I think he's the guy that benefits most from that perspective, from the absence of Klay Thompson. And, I think we saw some of the kind of splash games for him. He had a really good stretch, over the second half of the season, where it felt like he was scoring 20 a night. I'm trying to pull up that sample right now, a 30-game sample from mid-January through mid-March, where Kuminga gave you almost 21 points, 5.5 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 combined steals and blocks. That's something we need to come around, for fantasy purposes. The body style and his defensive abilities have not matched up with the defensive production. But for a guy you can often get, around pick 85 to 95, I think there's a lot of upside there.
Yeah, he's an exciting player, and it feels like if he ends up taking off the way that it looks like last year he started to, this is probably the lowest in drafts that you're going to be able to get Jonathan Kuminga for years to come. And like Nick said, he's not only a scoring option, he's a pretty good defender too. And I would think that just given his athletic profile, that's something that is probably going to get better with time. So I like that one. I would tend to agree. Give me the upside of Jonathan Kuminga. What about another team out west? We'll go with the LA Clippers. I know that you're all in on James Harden yet again heading into the season, but we're going to keep Harden out of the conversation. And I think a lot of people would just assume, okay, well, it's Kawhi, but there's so many question marks around him. Is it obviously Kawhi as far as a guy that you would target on the Clippers not named James Harden?
I mean, he's the obvious name as far as who would be the next Clipper off the board. Even if you're in a draft room full of guys who are anti-Kawhi, he's probably not going to fall out of the 40s. But even at that discount, I'm still not thrilled about it. If he's sitting there in like the low 50s, yeah, maybe it's worth it. I just think this could be a disaster year for him and for the Clippers. But I do love Harden. I mean, he's been extremely durable and is totally fine if they're losing games as long as he gets his numbers. One of my favorite targets on the Clippers or otherwise has been Ivica Zubac. And, his ADP varies pretty widely from site to site. Usually a guy you can expect to get around pick 100. You might have to do the unthinkable and take him at like 97 instead of like 108 like the previous years. But I think Zubac is just rock solid. It's like there are a lot of drafts you get to and you're like, man, I want another center eligible player. I want to have some depth there. And he's always just, sitting with open arms in that pick 100 range. A guy who's been really consistent year over year is always going to shoot 63 to 65%. He's a pretty decent free throw shooter as far as big men go. A guy who's been in the low to mid 70s throughout his career. He's going to give you 12 points, about 10 rebounds per game, maybe close to 1.5 blocks. And I do think there's room for him to improve from a minutes perspective. Only played 26 minutes per game last year. That was down about 2.5 minutes from 2 seasons ago. And for the first time in a while, the Clippers don't really have, the Mason Plumlee type, the Daniel Tice type, this guy who like seemingly is required to play 18 minutes off the bench. Like Mo Bamba is the only other real center on this roster. So I think from a minutes perspective, this could be the year that Zubac, I don't know if he plays 31, 32 minutes, but even 28, 29 would be a nice improvement.
No, and I'm glad that you went beyond just the obvious of Kawhi. And I am the type of fantasy player that seems to always wait too long to get the center. I like to play that game, and I often get burnt with it. So Zubac is the kind of guy that Like I would be doing backflips if I end up with him. Usually it's a much more precarious situation for me in drafts. I think the tough thing with the Clippers is it's not so much about who's the second, it's can you get to like 5? I mean, it's I don't know that you can. Terrence Mann is a draftable player, but is there anybody else on that team before I move on that you are even the slightest bit intrigued by?
Terrence Mann to me, I don't get it. Like, seems like a really nice guy. Seems like a good dude. He's had opportunities.
Definitely a locker room guy.
Like, there's been multiple times over the years where they're like, he's untouchable. We're not trading Trae Mann. Like, this guy, like, what is he doing? He must be just like the coolest dude of all time. I mean, this is the year, I guess, for him to finally break out. But again, Kawhi and Paul George have missed so much time over the last few years, and Trae Mann's Terrence Mann, excuse me, I'm talking about his brother, has had all these opportunities to break out and just never has. So, like, I'm not really that excited about him. You can basically get him for free at the end of a draft. So whatever, be my guest, but I'm not expecting a ton of upside. I'm more interested in Norman Powell, who is just, a boring veteran you could still get at the end of drafts. He's a guy that's a proven, 15 to 20 point per game scorer whenever the minutes are there. And I think the minutes will be there this year because they have no one else. And Kawhi Leonard's going to miss 20 to 25 games. And Norman Powell, you could argue, might be their number 2 scorer. So I think he's actually somebody I've been getting at the end of a lot of drafts who I think is a really nice value.
I'm still scrolling trying to find Norman Powell on the RotoWire consensus rankings. So I mean, is that like I mean, he's got to be like,
we got him at 131 in our default rankings on the site, I believe. Wait, no, that's where he finished last year. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. Let's see.
That's around where I was. So not totally a free player, but
no, we got him in the 140s. I mean, not somebody you have to pay up for, but I think the reputation versus potential value here is pretty good, especially when you look at other players in that ADP range.
All right, let's flip over to the East. I've got the Cleveland Cavaliers dialed up here, and then the obvious being Donovan Mitchell, a top flight fantasy option. And there's some other good ones. This isn't quite the abyss that the LA Clippers is. Yeah. I like some of these options, but who would you have as your second target on that roster?
Yeah, Cavs are an interesting one. I mean, a team with several players who go inside the top 100. Oh man, it's Mobley versus Allen versus Garland, right? I mean, if you look at ESPN ADP, all those guys go within a 10 pick span. In Yahoo, Evan Mobley has kind of separated himself, whereas Allen and Garland are pretty close. I think if Alex Barutha was here, he would say Darius Garland. He's become the big Darius Garland guy this year. And I'm in on that. I think Garland, it feels like he's kind of regressed over these last couple of years. I would more so say he's just had a series of really weird injuries, like an eye injury. He took an elbow to the face last year. And like these injuries have just kind of set him back. But whenever he's out there, I think he still looks like one of the better young guards in the league. And for somebody you can often get in the 70s in drafts, I think that's a really good value. Jared Allen is just a safe option, right? You know exactly what you're getting. You know what the limitations are. You know what the floor is. I think Mobley is the most interesting, though, because we started to see toward the end of last season, after like 2 straight years of, all right, when's this guy going to turn into Kevin Garnett? We started to see, kind of those ceiling type of games from Evan Mobley, even in the postseason when they were shorthanded. So we still have a larger sample of him being a little underwhelming, but I think this could be the year Evan Mobley takes a big leap forward.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would assume that Jared Allen is the worst of the two in terms of free throw percentage, and that's actually not the case. 71% career for Jared Allen. Evan Mobley still sub 70%. He did get a little bit better. We saw him trend in the right direction at 72% last year. I think I would, just off gut instinct, want to go Evan Mobley for the well-roundedness of his game. Yeah. He's more of a scoring threat than what you get from Jared Allen. Allen, the better rebounder, the better shot blocker, but Mobley can do those things pretty well also. And I think some of it is age. We still expect Evan Mobley to hit another gear in his career.
Yeah, exactly. And Jared Allen is young enough that you're not worried about regression or, kind of falling off at a certain age. But we're also at the point where he is what he is, and there's not another level up to go for Jared Allen, whereas there very well could be for Mobley.
Okay, this one was tough for me in just trying to figure out who number 1 was, but I'm going to go with the Chicago Bulls, and we are eliminating Josh Giddey as the option as far as who you are targeting. on the Chicago roster. Now, there could be some debate about that, but I don't think the number one is super obvious on this team either, let alone number two.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of ADP, it's still Nikola Vucevic, who might be like the most boring player in fantasy to talk about. So I'm fine with eliminating Giddey there. Kobe White and Zach LaVine have almost identical composite ADPs, according to the page on our site. And this is a situation that I've mostly stayed away from so far. We actually talked about it a little bit on the pod yesterday with Alex. Zach LaVine specifically, who looked really, really good over the weekend in the preseason. And I'm just struggling to come to terms with whether I should, buy in on that. He had 28 points, 6 of 6 from beyond the arc, 9 of 12 from the field in just 22 minutes against Memphis. For the most part, Zach LaVine has not missed maybe as much time as you would think. Obviously, last year was a total disaster, played 23 games, but he played 77 the year before. He played 67 the year before that. And that was a year where basically everybody was missing a ton of time. The 2 seasons prior, we had the limited seasons due to COVID and the bubble. So he's not, it's not a great health bet, but for a guy you can get at like pick 75 in some drafts, he's shown top 30 fantasy upside in the past. DeMar DeRozan's gone. I'm starting to talk myself into the risk reward on LaVine.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hope that he moves on somewhere else just simply because another team may value what he brings to the table more, and we have no idea what the Chicago team actually wants to be. But if they commit to Zach LaVine and he stays healthy, then sure. I think you would like to see him end up elsewhere just to sort of re-engage him a little bit. It seems like there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for him personally, for fantasy, it might be best that he's in Chicago because he is kind of the number one option as long as he's healthy. But for the rest of the Bulls roster, it would be better if he was moved, if that makes sense.
They were better without him last year.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, either way, this team is just like on a dead set track for like 37 wins. I think we know that. But you take LaVine out of the mix, all of a sudden, yeah, I'm all in on Kobe White. It's like I'm not really drafting Kobe White because I don't know how many games of last year's Kobe White we're going to get. I mean, there was a clear line of, all right, Zach LaVine is injured. Kobe White is now a significantly better player. And as long as LaVine is there, I just think there's kind of a cap for him. We're going to see less of Dosunmu. I mean, who knows with Lonzo Ball, if you get anything from him, he's supposed to make his debut tomorrow. And then obviously you bring Josh Giddey into the mix as well. So yeah, removing LaVine from the situation, much like removing Brandon Ingram from the Pelicans would just be much easier for fantasy managers.
Right. I want to get to a listener question or two, and we'll duck in a break, and we've got more of the fantasy basketball podcast to get to. Christian here says that he's a Cowboys fan and he feels dead inside. So making you feel better as a Jags fan. But the more fantasy basketball related question here from Christian: thoughts on taking Chet in the first round over some older star players? Where you at on that, Nick?
I'm not opposed to it. I mean, I wouldn't take Chet like 7th. But I think Holmgren versus, Sabonis or Halliburton or Trae Young. It's a debate. I think I would prefer to take him in round 2, of course, which is closer to his ADP. He's going around pick 17 in Yahoo leagues. He's going around ESPN in like pick 29. That seems really late. Underdog drafts going at the end of round 2. So you don't necessarily have to take him in round 1. I think, in terms of most drafts that you're going to be in, it might be more of a decision of, are you taking him ahead of LeBron? Are you taking him ahead of Durant? Are you taking him ahead of Mitchell or Booker or Curry? I think it's defensible. I think especially given the age of LeBron, Durant, and Curry specifically, and the fact that all those guys have missed time, I don't really worry about Hartenstein, cutting into Chet Holmgren's role. I think the biggest concern for me would be, are there any lingering effects from the foot issue that caused him to miss his entire rookie year? I mean, last season would say no, he played all 82 games, could not have gone better. But, unique body style guy, a guy who's going to keep adding weight throughout his career. We'll see how that holds up. But in terms of the production and the path that he's on and the fact that he played only 29 minutes per game last year, I think he's well worth considering, early in round 2, if not at the end of round 1.
Yeah, you're not going to get a guy that blocks shots at the regularity that he does sitting in that range that you feel as good about. Now that's the only reason to do it. But if you wanted any sort of tilt in that direction, I think it's hard to go inside of the first round, but early second round feels like a great range. And yeah, like you said, if you can get him past 20, That is an absolute steal. One more here. We got I traded Van Vliet for Miles Turner in a 9-cat dynasty of a bunch of really good guards. Any thoughts on that? Sounds like for your roster, the right move to make.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a bunch of really good guards, I think that's totally fine. Van Vliet on average has been the better fantasy player throughout his career as far as the ceiling type of finishes. But I don't think he's necessarily the exact same player that he was during the peak years in Toronto. I think there are a lot of mouths to feed. When it comes to that situation in Houston right now. Ultimately, though, I mean, he's still been a top 25 guy in total value each of the last 3 seasons. So you might be taking a short-term hit, as far as the total upside of your team, but totally depends on your build. And if you were heavy at guard and you were light at center, and Turner might even be forward eligible in some formats, I think that's totally fine. You didn't take a big loss there by any means. By the way, on Chet Holmgren, I'm doing the Raz Jam draft right now at the NFFC. He went with the 5th pick in round 2 in that draft, to give you some reference.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, that
sounds perfect. Taking him like pick 10 feels a little rich for my blood. We got a lot more to get to here on the Fantasy Basketball Podcast, but first let's hear from Nick Whalen and our friends over at DraftKings Pick 6.
We're thrilled to be partnering up with DraftKings Pick 6 this NBA season, and we still got a little time before opening night, but plenty of NFL options available over at Pick 6. Really been enjoying playing there each and every weekend. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. For football, we're talking yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in your picks and compete against opponents for a shot to win huge cash prizes. Download the all-new DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. For new Pick 6 customers, play at least $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Again, that code is ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
As promised, our most drafted list. Now, full transparency, Nick, I still have all of my drafts in front of me, so I have compiled more of an I want to draft them list, but I am curious to see what you've got here. I have This is sort of psychotic that I would wait this long, first of all. And then I have back-to-back drafts Monday and Tuesday as far as what do you think is in terms of draft scheduling? Do you endorse that?
As long as you can get them all in. I mean, I prefer to draft as late as possible for just about any sport. I like drafting like the night before the NFL season starts. I still have a few drafts coming in the next week as well. It's just becomes a time crunch. But I think the more information you could gather, the more injury info, the more rotation info we can glean from the preseason, the better you're going to end up doing, in a traditional redraft. So I have no problem with it as long as you have time for everything. We do have, by the way, the RotoWire staff stake league auction tomorrow afternoon, which will be occupying, a good 4-hour chunk of my day. Very much looking forward to that. Do you play in any auction NBA leagues?
I do not. I love the idea of auction, but I haven't played auction in fantasy basketball yet, and I've been very limited in the football auction exposure as well. So I just know I'm missing out because I love a good fab budget. So I think I would actually enjoy the auction. It's just
Yeah, it's stressful, but
it is very
really
time consuming though. That's one thing that I think why I've leaned away from it in the past is just the amount of time that it takes. I like the idea of that initial rush that you get when people start throwing bids out there. I don't love the idea of sitting there in hour 4 and trying to figure out what to do with my remaining $5.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's definitely stressful if you have not done an auction before. It could be a little bit overwhelming. This is also a 16-team league.
Yeah.
So you think an auction takes long in a 12-team league? I mean, this is like a full day commitment.
So I'll get us started here as far as an I want to draft list. I'm going to go pretty deep into the bag here. Payton Pritchard, you can get between pick 80 and pick 100, microwave scorer off the bench. We expect the Celtics to continue what they've been doing, which is blowing teams out with some pretty high frequency. So I think he's going to get plenty of run yet again. I actually bet him to win Sixth Man of the Year at 75-1. Why not? So he's definitely a guy that's going to land on a couple of my rosters.
Yeah, I mean, ADP wise, he might go undrafted in a lot of leagues. You know, you'll see Yahoo, he goes around pick 150. You know, ESPN, he's not even listed. So make sure you kind of double check on the acquisition cost for Pritchard. But yeah, as far as like final pick in a draft guy goes, you know, maybe you're hedging against health for the Boston Celtics, who were very healthy last season. And that's part of the reason that they were so dominant in the regular season. I don't necessarily see that turning around, but you know, if Drew Holiday's getting up there in age, if he misses time, if Derek White or Jaylen Brown misses time, we're certainly going to see more of Payton Pritchard. Finish 141st in total 8-cat value last season. I'll start much closer to the top of the board, Brandon, and say that two of my most rostered players so far in drafts have been Trae Young and James Harden. You know, guys you could honestly pair together if you want. You know, sometimes you don't have to reach that far for James Harden, but we are seeing his ADP rise across all formats. He's now up to 16.8 at Yahoo, still lagging behind a little bit at ESPN and Underdog. Fantrax drafts, he goes about pick 18, but he's firmly in the second round now for me. And I really like a lot of the options in round two. I view James Harden as having more upside than he's generally perceived to have. I've already bet him at, I think it was 8-1 to average at least 23 points per game this season. I mean, I really think we're set up for a bad team, good stats here for Harden. And, you know, for all of his warts as a player and, you know, effort level concerns and all that, like the guy doesn't really miss time. Like he's been remarkably healthy throughout his career. And then, you know, Trae Young, if I have like the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th pick, totally fine grabbing him. You know, I think the Hawks will be competitive enough. I think this is now back to being firmly his team, you know, with DeJounte Murray out of there. I think Risa Shea is a nice complimentary piece. Jalen Johnson's a nice complimentary piece. I think, you know, that's a guy who's had a top 5 fantasy season before. And if he stays healthy, I think it could happen again.
So another guy that's on my list, and this goes back to something I said earlier where I tend to wait a little too long with grabbing my center, and I feel like I'm always left scrambling. But this year, I think there's an easy out. You mentioned Zubac. That's not a bad option. What about Zach Edey, the rookie for the Memphis Grizzlies? I'm willing to jump about 20 spots to get him. I think he is going to be a bit of a stat stuffer and a guy that, just given their lack of depth as far as bigs on that team, I think he's going to grab a ton of rebounds. I think he'll have nights where he scores close to 20 points. So he's a guy, and he's big enough to just sort of like accidentally get a couple of blocks in there too. So he's a guy that I will definitely be targeting to fill that void that I often leave for myself.
Dude, he's been nasty so far in the preseason. He was great again last night. They actually brought him off the bench against Indiana. I think just kind of trying to get some different looks out there. You know, Jaren Jackson didn't play, Marcus Smart didn't play, John Morant didn't play, but Desmond Bane was out there. So they've kind of been mixing and matching some of these rotations so far. But Edey played 19 minutes off the bench. He was 10 of 15 from the field. He actually took a 3 as well. He was 3 of 4 at the line, 9 boards, didn't give you any blocks. And those are going to be kind of hit and miss for a guy his size. But finished with 23 points. I mean, the touch around the rim, like if you watch his highlights from last night, it's not like these are all just, you know, cleaning up, you know, grabbing an offensive rebound and laying it up, or, you know, lob dunks. Like he's making real post moves. Like he's telling guys, get out of the way. I'm gonna, you know, put Jarris Walker or put Isaiah Jackson in the rim, and I'm just gonna dunk this thing, or I'm gonna hit an easy 5-foot hook shot. Like he looks really comfortable. He looks really confident, and not surprised that his ADP has risen to the point where you probably have to take him inside the top 100 in most drafts. He's another guy in this RazJam draft, which does tend to be pretty competitive. It's on the NFBKC website. So you get a lot of guys who do a ton of drafts. He went with the 3rd pick in round 6.
What?
63rd overall. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I don't know that I'm prepared to do that. I kind of like the idea of that final run of centers that you can feel at least mildly comfortable with, taking him in that range of Walker Kessler and Zubac and guys like that. Like, if I would be willing to just target the upside, the bargain of him being a rookie and take him right above those players. But anything higher than that feels a little rich, even for someone that is on now my wanted draft list. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, according to ADP, you could still get him closer to that Zubac Kessler range, but I think for people who are paying attention to the preseason, you're gonna start seeing people take him much earlier. Maybe not early 6th round. That feels a little extreme, but I think if you go into a draft saying I want Zach Edey, if you wait till pick 100, I think there's a pretty good chance that he's not going to be there over the next week. In terms of other guys who I've drafted, I'll just list a few quickly.
Yeah.
Got a decent amount of Alperen Şengün. I think there's still a level up for him. There's not a ton of center competition for him in Houston. It's a crowded roster everywhere else. And I guess they do have Steven Adams. We'll see. It feels like we haven't seen him on an NBA court in forever. It's going to be weird to see him in a Rockets jersey. But I think Şengün is a guy that I feel pretty safe about in Houston. I had not drafted a whole lot of Paul George. Really, I don't think I have any Paul George, and we are waiting for more definitive update. He ended up leaving their preseason game last night with a hyperextended knee. Sounds like they're optimistic that it's not anything serious, but wasn't able to return, was kind of limping around, and just one of those injuries where you see the knee just bend the wrong way. So keep an eye on him. Desmond Bane is kind of a decent value to me. There's a lot of drafts where I'm always kind of like, I'm surprised Desmond Bane is still on the board. And, I think obviously John Morant being back in the mix, the Grizzlies just being a healthier team, getting another full season with Marcus Smart. Yeah, maybe his upside is not as high as it's been the last couple of years, but like I would take him over Derek White. I would take him over guys like Brandon Miller, DeAndre Ayton, who tend to go in that range. I think he's still a really safe player.
My last guy is going to be someone. I'll go a little bit more flashy here. Zion Williamson is going around pick 40. I'm about 10 spots higher on him, so I just know that he's going to be somebody that I target over that general range of guys that are going around him. I love Jalen Williams, but I would think I would take Zion ahead of him. I would take him ahead of Pascal Siakam. I would take him ahead of Jaylen Brown. I think this is going to be a healthy, productive season for Zion. He's already proven that he can be productive when he's on the court. The concern about Zion is that he can't stay on the court. He has taken health and weight seriously, and you can't hide this stuff. He's looked, you go back to really post All-Star break, he's looked like a different player. I've talked to people that work within that New Orleans organization. They say that he has completely committed himself to eating right and working out, and that's all I need to hear. So I'm all in on Zion. And I mean, come on top of it, he's an exciting player to have on your team. So you get to enjoy the fruits of what should be a breakout season for a guy that's already proven he could be one of the best.
Yeah, NBA player commits to working out. Thank you, Zion, for your service. He played 70 games last year, man. So it's already working. I'm looking at the end of the year, when Zion really went on that nice run, 25 game sample, 25 points, 6.5 boards, 5.5 assists. And here's the key here: 1.3 steals and 1 block per game. And he's shooting 56%, 72% at the line. That is all great because Zion has still not proven that he's giving you anything from beyond the arc. Best case scenarios, he hits like a half a 3-pointer a game and shoots 30%, whatever. That's kind of out the window for now.
Don't need it. We can fill that void elsewhere.
Right. But I think the thing is, even if Zion stays healthy, like he's probably it's like John Morant. He's a better real life player than he is a fantasy player right now, unless he's averaging 1.5 steals and 1 block. If he can give you 2.5 combined from those two categories, then yeah, absolutely. He's a top 40 guy. But if it's just points, rebounds, and assists and a decent field goal percentage, and he's kind of hurting you at the free throw line in roto leagues, I think there is still a disconnect between, wow, Zion's so fun to watch, and this guy's not really like a top 35 fantasy player.
Yeah, I am intoxicated by the talent. I will say that is definitely part of the recipe for me. Let's wrap the episode the way that we do on Tuesdays with the bounce. Every Tuesday, we wrap our fantasy basketball pod this way. I will give Nick 2 options, and he'll tell me which one he prefers. Which of these two is the bigger question mark heading into the season? DeMar DeRozan's fit in Sacktown or LaMelo Ball's health?
Ooh, Two good ones. For me, it's LaMelo Ball's health. I think it's one of the biggest questions in all of fantasy. It's something that I've talked with Barutha about a ton. He has planted his flag as a Lonzo Ball, or excuse me, a LaMelo Ball optimist, and I like his case. He's like, look, nobody else in that range has a case to be a first round value. In terms of per game production, in terms of total production. You're getting, it's like drafted Cooper Kupp, I would say, in fantasy football, where you're like, I know exactly what I'm signing up for, but man, if this breaks right, I'm getting maybe the third or fourth best receiver in football with the 36th overall pick in my draft. And that's what it feels like with LaMelo. I mean, the guy's played 58 games over the last 2 years. I think he may have done permanent damage to his feet and ankles by wearing the terrible Big Baller Brand shoes earlier in his career. We'll see if he bounces back. I mean, he's looked good so far in the preseason, but when it comes to DeRozan, like, I think he's one of those guys that can slide in anywhere. He's still not a great outside shooter, although he did more of that last year. But we've seen him, play for 3 different organizations. He's just been the same guy throughout his entire career. So I don't see that, being too much of a fit issue in Sacramento.
What happened to the dad, by the way? I haven't seen LeVar in a while.
Kind of amazing that he's stayed out of the spotlight, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like for a while there, he was like the Costco dad. And that looked like it was going to be, that was like the number one concern about both Lonzo and LaMelo was like, man, these guys are really good, but what if their dad ruins their career? And yeah, we haven't heard a peep, not a peep from LeVar.
Which is so weird because the guy couldn't shut up. It's amazing that there's a stark contrast. No idea. Which team with less than 40 wins last year do you think has a chance to pop this year? Atlanta without DeJounte Murray, perhaps more chemistry on that roster, or the Memphis Grizzlies with their stars like John Morant coming back?
I think it has to be Memphis. You could argue that the Hawks are in an easier conference, and if Risa Shea gives them anything, I think they could certainly be like a surprise, fun team. But I really think the Eastern Conference is pretty stock as far as what it's going to look like this year versus last year. It's like it's really hard to make a case why Boston, New York, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Orlando, Indiana, Philly, even Miami, none of those teams feel like they're poised to take a step back unless they have 2023-24 Memphis Grizzlies injury luck. Whereas, Memphis is like one of the most obvious bounce back candidate teams in history, given all the injuries that they had last year. Like nobody thinks this is a 27-win team. But when basically all of your key players miss significant time throughout the year and you're throwing out a G League roster over the second half, that's what's going to happen. So I mean, I've seen people project Memphis as high as like the second or third best team in the West. I certainly wouldn't get there, but I think they could finish 4th or 5th.
Yeah, they feel like they should be the pick there, but Atlanta does have a chance. I'm curious to see how this team performs with the subtraction of DeJounte. Him and Trae Young just did not work. And then what kind of impact does that have on the Pelicans? But that's a different topic for a different day. Which of these 2 preseason bets? I've made 2 award bets, and I'm usually not an award bet guy. I've got to get crazy odds in order to feel like it's even worth it to put a couple of bucks down. I don't like betting on other people's opinions. I like betting on games and players, but I have made 2 preseason bets that are award related. Which one do you endorse? Payton Pritchard, 6th man of the year. Already brought that one up. That's 75-1. Or Franz Wagner of my Orlando Magic for most improved player at 40-1.
Yeah, I think both of those are reasonable. I think I like the Pritchard one more. I think that's one where you have some obvious candidates. 6 man, it goes in cycles where for like 5 to 7 years, it's like the same guys are up for it every single year. You think of like the Jamal Crawford types, and Malik Monk has kind of become the new Jamal Crawford, and Naz Reid is always going to be in that mix as well. But I think in terms of value, Payton Pritchard is not a bad bet here, especially like you probably need an injury. You need Jrue Holiday to miss 20 games and Pritchard to like go crazy during that time, but he still plays enough games off the bench that he qualifies for the award. But I think that at what did you say, 75-1, that's pretty decent value. In terms of most improved player, I do think Franz makes sense as an option. I just think this is a really deep award. And, I think you got like 8 to 10 guys who you could make as good, if not a better case for. It feels like Wembanyama could take home this award. Jalen Williams has kind of been on the doorstep. We mentioned Kuminga earlier in the pod. I like Evan Mobley a lot at 12-1. Jalen Johnson maybe could have won it last year if he didn't get hurt. Then you have somebody like Emmanuel Quickly, who steps into essentially a full-time starting role and could see a huge jump in his numbers. So I think there's more reasonable competition for the most improved player award.
Yeah, and if Wembanyama becomes a top 5 player, then they're just going to hand him the award. I can't see him winning MVP, but I could see him winning that one. That's why he's the favorite to do so.
The thing with that is like second-year players almost never win Most Improved. I'm pretty sure the last one to do it was Monte Ellis, who should have this award named after him after such an accomplishment. But it is pretty rare. I will say, by the way, I was in a legal betting state this past weekend out in Wyoming. I put a little money on LeBron to win MVP at 150-1, just a little bit, just in case. Wow. Just in case, because I've said this every year for like 7 years now. If he could just stay healthy and the team can be competitive, there will be the, oh my goodness, look at what he's doing at age 40. This is incredible. The lifetime achievement MVP. I'm telling you, he needs to catch the breaks. But 150-1, yeah, I'll throw $5 on that.
I mean, come on, he's a generational player. If he could put it together for another year, he's still great. It's just, I don't think that's that crazy. It sounds crazy on the surface, but I don't think it's
kind of crazy. And I don't think it's not a plus EV bet by any means. The big problem is you would need so much help. Like LeBron could play 77 games, the Lakers could be the 4 seed, and he could still finish like 6th in MVP voting because you would need like Jokic, SGA, Doncic, Wembanyama, like all these guys would need to get injured. So I understand it's dumb, but look, 150-1, the narrative would be there if a few things break right.
As Kevin from The Office once said, you give me 100-1 odds on anything, you take it. I don't expect you to get that because you're not a pop culture guy, Nick. 4 episodes
in The Office. Come on, John Mellencamp.
4 episodes per week here on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. But that's going to do it for us here for today. Our episode presented by DraftKings Pick 6. I've been your host, Brandon Kravitz. He's the expert, Nick Whalen, and we will see you back here. More episodes coming up this week, and these two back next Tuesday. We'll see you then.